Welcome back. Today we're going to dig in. We talk a lot about having conversations. Let's talk about policing. I'm Keith.
I'm Rodney. This is the Daily Chronicle, where we chronicle our journey, the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that we're building, the businesses we're building, the businesses that we're in. Us trying to be better people. Lord knows we've made some mistakes. Trying to leave something for our daughters so they can be amazing people, even more amazing than they are, and building some community with you, good people.
Lots of people.
All right, we're gonna talk about policing. So, I just had a thought. I mean, Keith and I have been talking about policing this week. Why don't you just explain the problem that you brought up earlier?
Yeah, the problem I brought up earlier is that, is this idea that we're not having an honest conversation about all the components of policing that impact everybody's life. We're not just not having a conversation, we're not listening. We're either shutting out a data point because it somehow or another detracts from our theory, or we're just not listening for some reason. Again, it just detracts from our theory. And there's this giant, we've talked a lot lately about facts, right? Especially on the podcast. And all these facts are true. And if we're going to really solve this problem, we've got to look at all these facts and we've got to put them all in a soup and say, this shit needs to change. And it needs to change for a subset of our population faster than it needs to change for other part.
Wait.
Okay. Yeah.
So yes, we've been talking about facts a lot with a lot of guests. And a conclusion that we've come to is that the conversation is actually not about facts.
It's not.
It's actually about, generally when people are espousing facts, what they're really doing is telling their story and their understanding of data.
Yes.
Not the same thing as a fact. And that's where the disconnect happens, because it's not about the numbers. It's about my understanding and my relation. Not right now, but here, come say hi. Oh, come here. Hey, we can get it in a minute. It's about their understanding of the facts. And if we were more clear about and or honest about the fact that we're talking about our story and our relation to the facts, I think that might help. But either way, to what Keith was just saying, the fact remains that we don't hear the other person's story. We just want to hear our own. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but it is preventing progress. It has traditionally prevented progress.
And I will give you the example because I'll put it out there, right? There is a mathematical fact, right? And this is, we all know where I stand on it. This is a mathematical fact that more white people are killed by police than black people. There is a mathematical fact that innocent, unarmed, well, I shouldn't say innocent, but unarmed white people are killed at the hands of police in a similar fashion that we see on film. But so saying this, and the reason I bring this little piece up is because it represents exactly what we're talking about. As soon as I say that, some go, exactly. Like I'm making a point that white people are victimized too. Like, oh, I'm trying to stand on that sword, which I'm not. And then on the other side is now you're just diminishing the house on fire that is the overall systemic problem that is police, right? Towards black people, which is far deeper than deaths. It's a bigger conversation. We can't have it all here today. So I use this as a point simply to say that if it's my truth to share that piece of data based on my perspective, and your truth is based on the data, you're sharing it, we need to merge it, because at the end of the day, what we're now seeing is this problem with policing is a big deal. And we need to come up with ways of solving it. And we need to specifically solve it for the black community, because now we can take this murder data and talk about all of the other data that impacts vastly disproportionately the black people. I don't want to say the black community.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I think part of the data thing is sometimes the data gets left out. It's okay, those are true, and then We got to look at the rates and the percentages of population. The fact that I'm 3 times more likely to be killed by a cop than you. That is a piece of the data. Now, I think the other part of the conversation that you left out is that your question was like, well, why aren't white people more concerned about this? Because typically they're hearing the black data and so they're like, oh, this doesn't concern me. And it's like, well, there's actually data that says this does concern you or could concern you.
Yes, and it should concern you. And then to your point, we do go a layer deeper. There's a reason you're 3 times more likely because you're ungodly amount more likely to. So now to actually have a run-in with the police, right? And there's data that talks about why that may be, but that then goes into the socioeconomic impact of systemic racism with gentrification and redlining and other things that make it much harder. And you look at the historical systems that oppress black people in this country that have led to a lack of generational poverty. You look at the average wealth of a white American versus, or a white family versus a black family. Like all of these things start to really talk about what systemic racism is. And when we introduce these points of data, right, whether they agree with your theory or not, and I'm just going to say theory just for the sake of a point, it causes us to go further down the road. It causes us to work our way down this conversation to really understand what that data actually means for all of us versus it just being a white people are killed by cops, black people are killed by cops thing, right? Because it's a bigger conversation that we need to be having. So when we talk about policing, it is the nail that just got driven into your foot, right? But we do need to pull that nail out. But now we have a wound, and like we need to, this is a bad analogy, but like we need to address it, and we need to have more honest conversations that get all of us concerned about the problems, and it not just be like, especially white folks, like, well, you know, white people are killed by cops too. It's like, okay.
Couple narratives for the bigger conversation are, why are we okay with our police force killing people,
Yep.
murdering people? Like, why have we accepted that? Do we accept that? Why have we accepted the largest prison population in the history of the world? Why have we accepted that? Like, do we think there's that many criminals in the United States? Is prison the way to rehabilitate and or deal with this? Is this the right way? Because people get out of prison and we don't accept them back. So like, what's the right way to punish or deal with people that have actually committed crimes? Then there's equality and like who gets punished how, but like just the bigger conversations that are part of the minor conversations. We have to talk about the house on fire. We do have to talk about how black people are treated in the legal system and in the criminal justice system.
Yes.
Because if that inequity isn't cleaned up, then everybody would hope that they never have to deal with the criminal justice system. But if you're white and you have to deal with the criminal justice system, you're probably going to get a better shake than if you're black, like from a fairness standpoint, probably. But like, if I'm taken advantage of in the system, there's a chance that you could be taken advantage of in the system as well. Doesn't that bother you?
That's it. And like when we think about what it means to have the run-ins that black people have with the police, we have to look at the rate of prison sentencing versus equivalent white crimes. We have to look at what that does to a community, what that does to a neighborhood, what that does to leading to perceptions of this and that lead to biases that ultimately lead to more run-ins, that lead to more murders. Like all of this stuff plays a role, and we have to have an honest conversation about it, because you know what, at the end of the day, the system may disproportionately affect black people, but it's important for white people to know it can still affect you negatively pretty badly. And we all have to be in this together. We can't keep having this conversation of these are our only 2 points that we can argue. Like, we've got to have better conversations about this stuff. And
Nuance.
we can't hash this entire conversation out in a daily chronicle. So there's a lot more that we could dive into, but we'll leave it out there because we just want to make the point.